The dojo fell silent the moment the words left Ava Hale's lips. "Ray," she said, her voice dripping with mockery, "why don't you put that mop down and spar with us? Or are you only good at scrubbing floors?" Dozens of students burst into nervous laughter. The sound bounced off the polished hardwood floors and mirrored walls of Hale Legacy Dojo, echoing with a sting sharper than any kick. Ray Walker paused mid-swipe, mop dripping water into the bucket beside him. His shoulders stiffened, but he didn't answer. He never did. He had worked as the janitor here for nearly 2 years, enduring the snide remarks, the pitying glances, the casual invisibility. To them, he was just the help. But standing in the corner, clutching a small stuffed bear, was his 9-year-old daughter, Emma. Her wide eyes locked on her father, not on the powerful twin CEOs who stood in pristine black karate GI belts, tied with perfect knots. Ava and Sierra Hale sisters, founders legends in their own right. They had grown Hale Legacy into a national chain. Faces on magazine covers, embodiments of modern martial arts success. And now, in front of their students, they had chosen Ray as their target. Emma's voice whispered like a prayer only he could hear. "Daddy, please don't let them laugh at you." For the first time in years, something stirred inside him, a quiet flame long buried. If you're feeling your heart pound already, you're not alone. What would you do if the world mocked you in front of your child? Would you walk away, or would you rise? Tell me in the comments, because this story is about to prove that sometimes the most ordinary-looking man can shake the ground beneath everyone's feet. Sierra Hale folded her arms, expression like ice. "He won't do it," she declared. "Men like him hide behind excuses. Watch." But then came an unexpected voice. Grace Tran, a young student with fire in her eyes, stepped forward. "That's not right," she said firmly. "You shouldn't humiliate someone just because he cleans the floors. That's not karate. That's cruelty." Gasps rippled across the dojo. No one ever contradicted the Hale twins, not here, not in their empire. Sierra's glare cut through Grace like a blade. "Stay in your lane, student," she snapped. "You don't understand what discipline looks like." Ray placed the mop gently against the wall. The dojo seemed to inhale at once, holding its breath. He didn't raise his voice, but the weight of his words silenced every whisper. "I understand discipline better than you know." Ava smirked, misreading his calm as fear. "So you accept Emma's hand," trembled around her bear. Ray met her gaze. That was the only answer he needed. "Yes," he said, voice steady. "I'll spar." The room erupted. Some students laughed. Others pulled out their phones. In the back, Liam Ward, a man who had signed up for a free trial class, slid his phone discreetly from his gym bag. He wasn't just any student. He was a sports journalist looking for a story. And what he saw unfolding was pure gold. Emma's eyes shone with both fear and awe. She had never seen her father like this. He was always gentle, quiet, carrying the weight of 2 worlds, the loss of her mother and the demands of raising a child alone. She had never seen the steel that lay dormant beneath his silence. Ray stepped onto the mat. His faded work boots squeaked slightly against the polished floor. Ava sneered. Sierra adjusted her belt. Both women looked at him like a joke waiting to be exposed. But deep inside Ray's chest, the embers of an old identity flickered. Years ago, in the chaos of war, they had called him the Steel Ghost. His movements had been invisible, his calm unshakable. He had walked away from that world, burying it under quiet routines and forgotten glories. But tonight, in this dojo, for the sake of his daughter's eyes, he would let a glimpse of that ghost return. The students formed a circle, anticipation buzzing like electricity. Grace bit her lip, whispering a silent cheer for him. Liam pressed record. Don't hold back, Ray said quietly to the Hale twins. Ava laughed. Don't worry, janitor. We won't. And as the sisters bowed and stepped forward, the world held still. Emma's small voice echoed in his memory. Daddy, please. And Ray felt something awaken. He wasn't just sparring tonight. He was about to rewrite everything they thought they knew about strength. The dojo lights burned harsh and white, but in Ray Walker's mind, the room was already fading away. The moment he bowed toward Ava and Sierra, memories pressed against him, shadows of a past he had sworn never to awaken. There had been a time when he wasn't invisible, a time when his name carried weight across Marine bases, whispered with respect and a touch of fear. The Steel Ghost. That's what his brothers in arms had called him, because in combat training, he seemed to vanish, reappear, and end an opponent's advance before they even registered his movement. He had been sharp, precise, untouchable. But that was before the desert. Before the night when a mission went wrong, when smoke and fire swallowed his platoon, and screams rang through his headset until the line went silent. Ray had survived, but survival came with a cruel price guilt, heavy and unrelenting. He had returned home not as a decorated hero, but as a man broken, carrying scars no one could see. That was why he swept floors, why he chose anonymity in a dojo filled with bright lights and louder voices. He didn't want to be seen. Not until tonight. Emma's face shimmered at the edge of his vision, anchoring him to the present. Her little hands clutched the bear her late mother had sewn the last gift before illness took her too soon. That bear had gone everywhere. Emma did a symbol of comfort and continuity. Tonight, she held it as if it were a shield. Ray inhaled slowly. His voice, low but certain, carried across the mat. I don't fight for pride. I don't fight for applause. I fight so my daughter knows her father isn't a coward. A hush spread through the room. Even Ava and Sierra, so quick with their sarcasm, faltered for a second. Then Ava's smirk returned. That's touching. But this is karate, not a therapy session. She lunged forward, testing him with a sharp jab, meant to humiliate rather than hurt. Ray stepped aside with the ease of a man stepping out of sunlight. No sound, no strain, just calm evasion. Sierra circled, her eyes narrowed. She had sparred against champions, against fighters twice her size. But something about Ray's stillness unsettled her. It wasn't arrogance. It was absence, as if his body moved, but his mind was elsewhere, untouchable. Keep your guard up, old man. She snapped, more to steady herself than to mock him. Emma leaned forward from the bench, eyes wide, whispering, Go, Daddy. Ray's past surged again. He remembered nights in the barracks when younger recruits begged him to teach them. He remembered how he used to tell them, a true fighter doesn't move to destroy. He moves to protect. That truth had never left him. And now, in this unlikely stage, it would guide every choice. He parried Ava's second strike with a subtle deflection, almost a caress rather than a block. His eyes never hardened, never flashed with anger. If anything, there was sorrow in them, sorrow that they, with all their wealth and skill, had forgotten the essence of what they claimed to represent. Grace watched with tears welling. She had studied psychology alongside martial arts, and in Ray's every gesture she saw restraint. He wasn't there to win. He was there to teach. Liam's phone camera captured it all, the mop-wielding janitor transforming into something extraordinary, his movements poetry etched in silence. Still, Ray knew he couldn't evade forever. Emma needed to see more than patience. She needed to see courage. She needed to know that a man could face humiliation head-on, not shrink from it. So he stepped forward. For the first time, he attacked not with force, but with precision. A light sweep of the leg brought Ava stumbling back. though he caught her arm before she hit the mat. The crowd gasped. Ava's confidence cracked, confusion flickering across her face. Sierra leapt in furious. Her kick cut through the air like a blade, but Ray moved like water, redirecting her momentum until she spun harmlessly to the side. He placed a single finger against her shoulder, just enough pressure to guide her balance downward. Sierra fell to one knee. The dojo erupted in whispers. Ava flushed. Sierra clenched her teeth. Grace whispered, "He's not even trying." Emma rose to her feet, eyes glistening. For the first time in her young life, she saw her father not as the quiet man who patched her school shoes and packed her lunches, but as something greater, someone who carried within him a quiet flame, strong enough to humble even the most powerful. Ray exhaled, grounding himself. He would not let triumph intoxicate him. This wasn't about revenge. This was about dignity, and about a promise, a silent one he had carried since the desert, that he would never again turn his back on those who needed him. As the round ended, the dojo trembled with an energy no one could name. Ava and Sierra, once untouchable, now looked shaken. The students no longer laughed, and Emma, clutching her bear, whispered to no one in particular, "That's my dad." And in that moment, Ray Walker understood this wasn't about sparring. It was about reclaiming the part of himself he had buried, and showing his daughter that courage once chosen could never be mocked. The energy inside the dojo shifted like a storm gathering strength. The air, once buzzing with laughter, now hung heavy with unease. No one had expected Ray Walker, the janitor with calloused hands and a faded mop, to stand his ground so effortlessly against the Hale sisters. Ava's jaw tightened as she adjusted her stance. She had sparred against national champions, silenced critics with her speed, her power, her flawless form. Yet she could not ignore what had just happened. Ray had turned aside her strikes like a man brushing away raindrops, not arrogant, not triumphant, just steady like a mountain no storm could move. Sierra's pride flared hotter. She stepped forward, determination etched across her sharp features. "Enough warming up," she hissed. "Let's finish this." Together, the twin CEOs circled him, two predators closing in. Their black belts shimmered under the light symbols of discipline, of legacy. But in their eyes, pride burned brighter than humility. Ray stood still, shoulders relaxed, expression unreadable. The weight of memory tugged at him, training halls overseas, sand whipping through desert winds, comrades moving as one. He had learned long ago that silence unnerved opponents more than bravado. Tonight, silence was his weapon. The first strike came from Ava, fast as lightning, a spinning back kick aimed straight at his ribs. The crowd inhaled as one. But Ray pivoted a fraction, letting the strike whistle past his body, bending with water-like grace. At the same instant, Sierra lunged from the opposite side, her fist slicing toward his jaw. Ray's hand rose not to strike, but to guide her momentum away. She stumbled her balance, betrayed by his effortless redirection. Gasps erupted. Phones lifted higher. Liam Ward's camera shook slightly as he muttered, "What on earth am I watching?" Emma, perched on the bench with her bear pressed tight against her chest, did not blink. Her lips parted in awe. She had always known her father was strong in quiet ways, the way he stayed up to fix her school projects, the way he never complained, no matter how late he worked. But this was something new, something she would remember forever. Ava snarled, cheeks burning red. "Don't just dodge, old man, fight." Ray finally moved. It wasn't dramatic, wasn't violent. He stepped forward, slipping past Ava's guard like mist, and with a single controlled motion tapped her shoulder with the palm of his hand. The force was almost nothing but placed with perfect precision. Ava collapsed backward onto the mat, breathless eyes wide with disbelief. The dojo froze. The silence was deafening. No one could comprehend what they had seen. One moment, the twin CEO was on the offensive. The next, she was sprawled on the ground, defeated by what looked like a feather's touch. Sierra's fury erupted. She lunged with a roar, abandoning calculated strikes for raw force. Her roundhouse kick sliced the air with lethal intent. But Ray ducked beneath it, with an elegance born not of showmanship, but survival. He rose smoothly, caught her wrist, and guided her downward. A light push to the back of her knee sent her kneeling stunned, humbled in front of her own students. The dojo erupted in whispers and cries. No way, he didn't even hit them. Did you see that? He barely moved. Grace, her hands trembling, whispered through tears. That's not sparring. That's mastery. Sierra, breathing hard, her pride shattered, looked up at him from the mat. For the first time in years, the iron mask of arrogance cracked. Ava, still catching her breath, stared from the floor, her confidence broken. The Hale sisters, women who had built an empire on discipline and dominance, now knelt before a man they had mocked minutes ago. But Ray didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He didn't even speak. He simply stepped back, his calm like a mirror, reflecting their own pride back at them. Emma leapt from the bench, running across the mat. She wrapped her small arms around his waist, eyes brimming with tears of pride. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice shaking with emotion. Ray bent down, brushing her hair gently from her forehead. His eyes softened, the steel in him fading to warmth. "It's all right, sweetheart. It's over." But it wasn't over. Not yet. Because in the back of the dojo, Liam Ward's camera kept rolling. His journalist's instincts screamed that he had just captured something extraordinary. Something the world would devour once it left these walls. He zoomed in on Ray's face, that quiet humility, the juxtaposition of a janitor mopping floors by day and a warrior humbling CEOs by night. This wasn't just a spar. This was the beginning of a story that would ripple far beyond the dojo. The silence cracked as a student muttered, "Who is he?" Another voice, trembling with recognition, whispered, "Wait, I've seen him before, years ago, in a military video. They called him the Steel Ghost." A dozen heads turned. Ava's chest tightened. Sierra's lips parted. Grace covered her mouth. And Emma, looking up at her father with wonder, suddenly realized there were parts of him she had never known. The room buzzed with disbelief. Phones lit up. Screens flashed as students began searching. And Ray, holding his daughter close, felt the quiet flame inside him grow stronger, not for vengeance, not for fame, but for the one truth that mattered most. Emma would never again have to bow her head in shame because of who her father was. The dojo buzzed like a hive struck open. Students crowded together, their whispers rising above the heavy silence left by Ray's effortless victory. Ava and Sierra still sat on the mat, shaken, their black belts tied neatly, but their pride unraveling. Grace was the first to break. Tears spilled over her cheeks and she covered her mouth, whispering, "I knew it. I knew he wasn't ordinary." Ray stood where he had finished Emma, clinging tightly to his side. His expression was steady, not triumphant. To him, this wasn't conquest. It was survival dignity. And above all, it was love for his daughter. From the back, a student's phone chimed. He had been typing, furiously searching. His voice trembled as he read from the glowing screen. Ray Walker, United States Marine Corps, decorated combat instructor, nickname the Steel Ghost. The words landed like a thunderclap. Heads whipped around. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, each one carrying disbelief and awe. "No way. That's him. I saw that article years ago. He trained special ops fighters. He just disappeared after Liam Ward's hands shook as he held his phone steady. He wasn't just recording a spar anymore. He was documenting a revelation." The man everyone had overlooked, the janitor who swept sweat and chalk dust from the dojo floors, was in fact a legend the martial arts community had nearly forgotten. Ava's throat tightened. She tried to rise but stumbled, her body betraying her shock. Sierra remained kneeling, her knuckles pressing against the mat, her eyes locked on Ray, as though trying to reconcile two truths, at once the man they mocked and the warrior who had humbled them without breaking a sweat. Emma pulled at her father's sleeve. "Daddy, is that really you?" Ray knelt so they were eye to eye. His weathered hands cupped her small shoulders. His gaze softened, though sorrow lingered beneath the surface. "It was me once. But now, I'm just your dad. That's the only name I need." The tenderness of the moment struck deeper than any display of skill. The students, once giddy with excitement, now stood in reverent silence. Grace's tears fell harder. She whispered, "That's the truest martial artist I've ever seen." But Sierra's pride fought to recover. So what if he was a Marine that was years ago? He's a janitor now. Her words sounded hollow even to herself. The student's eyes told a different story. Ava finally found her voice, though it wavered. "We humiliated him, and he protected us instead of destroying us." Ray rose, pulling Emma gently to her feet. He turned toward the sisters. His voice carried no anger, only a calm firmness that pierced deeper than any insult. "You asked me to spar. I accepted. But remember, this martial arts isn't about showing who's strongest. It's about protecting those who cannot protect themselves. And tonight, you forgot that." Gasps echoed. Some students lowered their heads ashamed on behalf of their leaders. Ava blinked rapidly, her vision blurring with tears she refused to shed. Sierra looked away, jaw clenched, but her silence admitted more than words ever could. Ray bent to pick up his mop, as though nothing extraordinary had happened. His calm dismissal of victory stung the sisters more than any blow. He had proven himself not through domination, but through restraint. As he and Emma walked toward the door, Liam's eyes followed them. His instincts screamed, "This is a story the world needs to see." That night, long after the dojo emptied, Liam sat in his small apartment hunched over his laptop. He replayed the footage again and again, the janitor's quiet defiance, the impossible fluidity of his movements the moment Emma ran into her father's arms. It wasn't just skill on display. It was humanity distilled into motion. With trembling fingers, Liam uploaded the video. He didn't even write a headline, he let the footage speak for itself. But before he closed his laptop, he whispered to himself, "The world forgot him. Tomorrow they'll remember." Meanwhile, Ray tucked Emma into bed. She curled against her bear, her eyes heavy, but her voice soft. "Daddy, they called you a ghost." Ray smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "Maybe. But ghosts don't get to tuck their daughters in at night. That makes me luckier than any legend." Emma's lips curved into a sleepy grin. "You're my hero." Ray sat in the dim light watching her drift to sleep. For the first time in years, he felt the past loosen its grip. He wasn't the steel ghost anymore. He was a father, and somehow that made him stronger. But far away in the glow of 100 screens, the world was about to rediscover the man nobody noticed. The morning after the sparring match, Hale Legacy Dojo felt different. The glossy banners with Ava and Sierra's confident smiles seemed to hang heavier, their authority dulled by the memory of last night. Whispers filled the lobby before class even began. Students spoke in hushed tones, replaying the moment Ray Walker, the quiet janitor they had all overlooked, had humbled the twin CEOs without breaking a sweat. For many, the image of Emma running into his arms lingered stronger than the knockdowns themselves. When Ray arrived, mop slung casually over his shoulder, conversations faltered. Some nodded at him with newfound respect, others simply stared. He didn't acknowledge it. His steps were steady, purposeful, as though the night before had been nothing more than a chore finished and forgotten. But Ava and Sierra weren't so easily at peace. Inside the main hall, they stood rigid arms, crossed, trying to maintain their authority. Yet their eyes betrayed a storm of doubt and shame. They had been leaders, models of strength, and in a single evening they had been stripped of their pedestal by a man who never sought the spotlight. When Ray stepped onto the mat to sweep Ava's voice, cracked through the silence. Ray. He paused, mop handle resting against his palm. Dozens of eyes turned. Emma, coloring in a corner of the hall with her crayons, looked up anxiously. Ava swallowed hard. For a moment, pride clashed with humility on her face. You embarrassed us last night." Ray didn't flinch. "No," he said softly. "You embarrassed yourselves." Gasps rippled. Sierra stiffened her jaw, clenching. Ava blinked, wounded by the calm finality of his words. Ray's gaze moved across the students gathered there. His voice carried a quiet weight that silenced even the faintest whispers. "You forgot what martial arts stands for. Discipline, respect, protection. You mocked me not because of what I could or couldn't do, but because of what I looked like, because I sweep your floors. And worse, you mocked me in front of my daughter." Emma's small hand stilled on her paper. Her eyes welled as she listened, hearing her father speak, with a dignity she had always felt, but never seen so plainly. Ray set the mop aside and stepped closer. His tone never rose, but each word struck harder than any punch. "I don't need apologies for myself. I've carried heavier insults than yours. But you owe these students better. You owe my daughter better. If you're leaders, prove it not by fighting harder, but by bowing lower when you've forgotten humility." Silence swallowed the dojo whole. No one moved. Ava's lips parted, her breath shaky. She had built her empire on discipline, but never had anyone demanded her to embody it with such simple truth. Slowly, as though the weight of her belt dragged her down, she lowered her gaze. I'm sorry," she whispered, voice breaking. Then louder, for all to hear. "Emma, students, Ray, I'm sorry." The moment was seismic. For the first time in years, Ava Hale bowed not as a CEO, not as a champion, but as a student admitting fault. Eyes widened. Grace's hands trembled, tears shining in them. She whispered, "That's real strength." Sierra remained upright, rigid as stone. Her pride screamed at her to resist, but even she could not deny the truth in Ray's words. Her voice was clipped, controlled, but her eyes softened for a fraction of a second. "I'll consider what you said." It wasn't much, but it was more than anyone had ever heard from Sierra Hale. Ray nodded nothing more. He picked up his mop, returned to his work, as though nothing extraordinary had occurred. To him, humility wasn't a performance. It was simply how a man lived when he knew the weight of real battles. That evening, when the dojo emptied, Liam Ward uploaded his footage. He had debated all day whether to add commentary, but in the end, he let the images speak. Ray's movements, Emma's embrace, his quiet demand for humility. The title was simple: "The Janitor Who Taught Two CEOs the True Meaning of Karate." The video caught fire before dawn. By sunrise, it had thousands of views. By nightfall, it had millions. Comment sections flooded with shock, admiration, and questions. Veterans recognized him instantly. Martial artists debated the subtlety of his technique. Parents shared the video with captions like, "This is what I want my kids to learn about strength." Ray knew none of this. He sat at home with Emma, helping her practice tying her shoes properly. She laughed when she fumbled the knot, and he smiled, patient as always. For him, the world hadn't changed. But for Ava and Sierra Hale, and for everyone who had witnessed or would witness the video, the image of a janitor demanding humility with nothing but dignity would not fade. Because sometimes the hardest strike isn't the one that knocks you down. It's the one that humbles you without ever landing at all. By the second day, Ray Walker's life was no longer his own, at least not in the eyes of the world. Liam Ward's video had spread like wildfire, jumping from martial arts forums to mainstream media within hours. By sunrise, it had trended on YouTube. By noon, it was clipped on talk shows and dissected on sports podcasts. By evening, hashtags with Ray's name were trending worldwide. The footage spoke for itself, the janitor stepping onto the mat, with quiet resolve, dismantling the twin CEO's pride, with movements so calm they seemed unreal, the tender embrace of his daughter afterward. Viewers didn't just see skill, they saw story. A man dismissed, mocked, underestimated, yet carrying himself with dignity so powerful it broke through every screen. Grace Tran was the first to feel the wave personally. Her phone exploded with messages after her tearful face was spotted in the background of the video. Journalists wanted quotes. Podcasters wanted interviews. Students she had trained with sent messages. You were right to stand up for him. You saw it before the rest of us did. Grace, overwhelmed, found herself invited to a local news studio. When asked on air why she had defended him, she spoke plainly. Because what I saw in Mr. Walker was the truest form of martial arts restraint, respect, compassion. That's what we're supposed to be learning. He reminded us of that when we had forgotten. Her words resonated almost as much as the footage itself. Meanwhile, Ava and Sierra Hale faced a storm they had never imagined. Their inboxes filled with criticism, their dojo's social media pages flooded with comments demanding accountability. Where is your apology? You forgot your own code. How could you humiliate the man who embodies everything you preach? Ava spent long nights replaying the video on her phone, the same section again and again. Ray catching Sierra's kick, redirecting it harmlessly, then tapping her shoulder with nothing more than a whisper of force. But what struck Ava most wasn't the technique. It was the moment Emma ran into her father's arms, and he smiled down at her with a gentleness that made Ava's throat tighten every time. That look, Ava thought. That's what real strength looks like. Sierra, though outwardly composed, couldn't escape the fallout either. At meetings, investors asked sharp questions about their values. Students demanded answers. In private, she avoided Ava's eyes, not ready to admit the gnawing realization that Ray had exposed a hollow space in both of them. Ray himself remained untouched by all of it. He didn't own a smartphone. He didn't follow trends. His days remained the same, mop in hand, steady steps. Evenings spent cooking with Emma, checking her homework, tucking her in with stories. Yet even in his quiet world, cracks of the storm bled through. At the grocery store, strangers stopped him. "Are you?" they would ask, fumbling for words. At the park, teenagers whispered and pointed as Emma swung on the monkey bars. One evening, a neighbor knocked on his door with a laptop in hand. "You should see this," she said gently. Reluctantly, Ray sat down as she opened the video. For the first time, he saw himself through the eyes of the world. There he was, mop set aside, standing across from Ava and Sierra. His movements looked almost alien, effortless, and sharp. But when Emma leapt into his arms, the video froze in the neighbor's pause. The comment section below glowed with thousands of voices. "This is fatherhood at its finest. I want my son to learn from this man. Strength without humility is nothing." He reminded us all. Ray closed the laptop quietly. His face betrayed no pride, no excitement. Only a heaviness, as though the past he had buried was clawing its way back to the surface. That night, after Emma fell asleep, he sat in the dim kitchen. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. He thought of the desert of names carved into stone, of men who never came home. He had promised himself anonymity, obscurity, as a way to carry his guilt alone. Now the world was dragging him back into the light. But he reminded himself this wasn't about him. It was about Emma. About making sure she knew that her father, despite his flaws, would never hide when she needed him to stand tall. Across town, Ava couldn't sleep. She sat at her desk, phone glowing in the dark. Headlines blurred across the screen. The janitor who humbled CEOs. The steel ghost returns. A father's lesson in humility. Each headline cut her deeper. She watched again the moment Ray placed his hand on Sierra's shoulder, guiding her to the mat without cruelty. Ava pressed her palms against her face, whispering into the silence. We forgot the code. For the first time in her life, she felt envy, not of his skill, but of his peace. The next day, Liam Ward was invited to speak on national television about the video he had posted. Sitting under bright studio lights, he leaned forward and said, "What I filmed wasn't just martial arts. It was fatherhood. It was humility. And maybe it's a reminder we all need, that the strongest people aren't the loudest. Sometimes they're the ones we overlook." The anchor asked, "Do you think Ray Walker will step into the public eye now that the world knows who he is?" Liam shook his head. "I don't think he cares about the world. I think he cares about his daughter. And that's exactly why the world cares about him." The video had made them famous for all the wrong reasons. For years, Ava and Sierra Hale had been the faces of martial arts success, black belts, CEOs, women who commanded respect in every boardroom and every dojo. But now they were symbols of pride gone astray. Articles dissected their arrogance, memes mocked their fall, and students quietly avoided their gaze during classes. Ava sat at her desk, late into the night, the dojo silent around her. She watched the video for what felt like the 100th time. Each replay was a mirror held to her flaws, her taunts, her smirk, the way she dismissed the man who had shown her more mastery than any champion she had ever faced. She paused at the moment Ray placed his palm against her shoulder and dropped her to the mat. She remembered the sensation, not pain, but the shocking realization of how little strength was needed when a technique was perfect. But what haunted her wasn't the fall. It was what came after Emma running into Ray's arms, his face softening into the kind of fatherly love Ava hadn't seen since she was a child herself. She wiped at her eyes, frustrated with the tears that burned there. For the first time in her life, Ava Hale felt like the student, not the teacher. Sierra, however, remained unbent. She stood at the window overlooking the city, arms folded tightly across her chest. "We don't owe him anything," she muttered. "He embarrassed us. He humiliated the dojo." Ava turned her voice low but steady. "No, Sierra. We humiliated ourselves. He just held a mirror up to who we've become." Sierra's jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. Deep down, she knew her sister was right. Yet her pride, honed over decades of winning tournaments and outlasting rivals, refused to let her admit it. The next day, Ava made a decision. She would find Ray, not as a CEO, not as a fighter, but as a woman who needed to say the words she had forgotten how to say, "I'm sorry." Ray was at the park that afternoon, just as he often was when Emma came home from school. The sun stretched low, painting the sky in streaks of orange and gold. Emma giggled as she practiced the basic karate forms her father had taught. Her simple movements, not for competition, but for focus and balance. Ray stood behind her, guiding her gently. "Not too fast," he murmured. "Karate isn't about speed. It's about control. Every movement has purpose." Emma nodded, her little fists tightening with determination. She looked up at him with a grin. "Like you." Daddy Ray smiled faintly. "Like you someday." From across the park, Ava watched. Her heart ached at the sight. The way Ray bent low to Emma's level, the way his patience wrapped around her like a shield. It was everything Ava had forgotten about why she fell in love with karate in the first place. Not trophies, not titles, but the quiet shaping of character. She hesitated, nerves gnawing at her. What if he refused to hear her? What if he dismissed her the way she had dismissed him? Still she walked forward. Sierra, who had followed, reluctantly trailed behind. At a distance, her arms folded, but her eyes fixed on the man who had undone them. Emma spotted Ava first. Her laughter faded. She moved closer to her father, clutching his sleeve. Ray turned his expression unreadable as Ava approached. "I came to apologize." Ava began, her voice trembling despite the years she had spent commanding boardrooms. Not for losing to you, but for forgetting the code, for forgetting respect, for forgetting what it means to be a teacher. Ray studied her quietly, his silence stretched, not cold, but contemplative. Finally, he spoke, his tone steady. "Apologies don't change the past, but they can shape the future." Ava's breath caught. She bowed deeply, her forehead nearly brushing the grass. The gesture was not CEO to janitor, not black belt to challenger. It was student to teacher. Sierra stood frozen, conflict raging in her chest. She wanted to scoff, to accuse Ava of weakness. Yet seeing her sister bow, seeing Ray stand unmoving, dignified, and quiet, pierced something in her. For the first time, Sierra felt her certainty fracture. She didn't bow, but she also didn't turn away. Instead, her voice was softer than Ava had ever heard it. "You made us see ourselves. That's not easy to forgive." Ray's gaze flicked to her, then back to Ava. "Forgiveness isn't earned in a day. It's proven one choice at a time." Emma tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy, she's crying." Ava quickly brushed at her cheeks, embarrassed, but the truth was plain. The weight of pride had cracked, and through it seeped something purer, humility long overdue. Ray bent down to Emma, whispering gently, "Sometimes even the strongest have to cry, sweetheart. That's how they grow." Emma nodded solemnly, then looked at Ava with a child's disarming honesty. "Do you want to practice with us?" Ava's lips parted. For a moment she couldn't speak. Finally she shook her head. "Not today, but maybe. Someday." She turned to leave, her steps heavy but lighter than when she had arrived. Sierra lingered a few seconds longer, her eyes unreadable before following her sister. Ray watched them go, then turned back to Emma, who was already resuming her forms with fierce concentration. He exhaled slowly, a hint of relief in his breath. For all the storms the world had brought to his door, moments like this, his daughter's laughter, her small fists punching the air with hope, were all that truly mattered. But as Ava's bowed figure lingered in his mind, Ray couldn't shake the sense that something had shifted. The Hale sisters were no longer just CEOs. They were human beings who had forgotten the code and who might be ready to rediscover it. The morning after Ava's apology at the park, the Hale Legacy Dojo felt quieter, almost reverent. Students moved through warm-ups with subdued focus, their eyes no longer shining with the same blind admiration for their CEOs. Whispers of the steel ghost still drifted in the corners, mingling with unease and curiosity. Ava walked into her office with a small box tucked beneath her arm. She had not slept well. Images of Emma's wide-eyed gaze haunted her, the way the little girl had looked at her father, not with fear or shame, but with radiant pride. It was a look Ava realized she had once given her own father when she was a child, before ambition hardened her, before trophies replaced tenderness. Sierra sat at the desk, scrolling through their flooded inbox. She looked up, her expression sharp but tired. Another 200 messages demanding we resign. I'll answer later. Ava set the box down gently. I'm not answering. I'm giving. Sierra arched a brow. Given what a gift? Ava said, her voice calm but resolute. She opened the lid. Inside lay a pristine white karate GI, embroidered with Emma's name, stitched in careful letters, alongside a small hardcover book, The Way of Karate Discipline, Respect, and Compassion. Sierra's lips pressed into a line. So you think a uniform and a book erase what we did? No, Ava said softly. But maybe it can help a little girl know that not all teachers forget the code. Maybe it can help us start again. Sierra didn't argue further. Her silence, though reluctant, wasn't opposition. It was the silence of someone listening, even if she wouldn't admit it. That evening, Ray returned home with Emma, who chattered about school as she kicked off her sneakers. On their small kitchen table sat a neatly wrapped package, hand-delivered with a note. Ray frowned. He hadn't expected visitors. Carefully, he unwrapped the gift. Emma's gasp filled the room as she pulled out the child-sized GI, her eyes glowing as though she held treasure. Daddy, it has my name on it, she squealed, pointing to the embroidered letters. She flipped open the book, next running her fingers across the pages. Did you see it talks about kindness, too, not just fighting? Ray read the note aloud. Ava's handwriting careful but firm. For Emma, because karate should begin with compassion. With respect, Ava and Sierra Hale. Ray stared at the note for a long time. His first instinct was to set it aside to distrust the gesture, as guilt wrapped in cloth. But Emma's joy was undeniable. She twirled in the GI, beaming her small frame, swallowed by the crisp fabric, as though she had been waiting her whole life for this moment. Do I look like a real karateka now, Daddy? She asked, bouncing on her toes. Ray knelt, tying the belt around her waist with careful hands. His voice softened. You've always been one, sweetheart. The uniform just makes it easier for the world to see. Emma giggled, hugging him fiercely. For her, the gift was not about corporate guilt or public redemption. It was about being seen, respected, welcomed. In the days that followed, Ava began showing up at the same park where Ray and Emma practiced. She didn't intrude. She didn't announce herself. She simply sat on a nearby bench sometimes with a coffee in hand, watching. At first, Ray pretended not to notice, but Ava was hard to ignore. The sharp business suits replaced with simple workout clothes, her hair tied back, her posture less rigid than he remembered. She watched Emma's clumsy punches and Ray's patient corrections, with something almost wistful in her eyes. One afternoon, Emma noticed. Daddy, she whispered, tugging his sleeve mid-form, the lady CEO is here again. Ray glanced over. Ava offered a small, almost self-conscious wave. Emma, ever, the child of unfiltered honesty, waved back brightly. Hi, Miss Ava. Do you want to practice with us? Ava shook her head quickly, but her smile wavered. Not today. Maybe. Someday. Ray returned to Emma, correcting her stance. Yet, as the golden light of sunset spilled over the park, he found himself glancing toward Ava more than once. Not out of suspicion, but curiosity. Meanwhile, Sierra battled her own conflict. She never accompanied Ava to the park, but she kept asking about it afterward. What does he do there? What does the girl look like when she practices? Does he say anything to you? Her questions were clipped, but the undertone was clear. She cared, though she couldn't bring herself to step closer. One evening, Sierra opened the dojo doors to find Grace helping younger students stretch. Grace greeted her politely, but Sierra noticed the wariness in her eyes. Once, Sierra had commanded unquestioned loyalty. Now, even her students seemed to weigh her against Ray Walker's example. It unsettled her deeply. Yet beneath the sting was something else, an uncomfortable awareness that maybe the janitor had been right. Maybe she had strayed further from the path than she realized. Ray, however, refused every invitation from journalists, declined every interview request that Liam tried to pass along. "I don't want my life on screens," he told Liam bluntly one evening after the man tracked him down outside the grocery store. "I just want to raise my daughter." Liam, impressed but frustrated, nodded. "Then at least know this, Ray, the world is watching. And what they're seeing is changing people. Don't dismiss that." Ray didn't answer. He simply walked home, Emma skipping beside him in her oversized jai, humming tunelessly. To him, that was all the world he needed. But Ava remained on that park bench in the days that followed. Quiet, respectful, almost penitent. And though Ray never invited her closer, he also never asked her to leave. It was the beginning of something neither of them could name, yet something fragile growing in the quiet spaces between humility and forgiveness. The phone call came just after dusk. Sierra Hale sat alone in her office, the hum of the city seeping faintly through the windows. Her posture was as rigid as ever, but her eyes betrayed fatigue. On the other end of the line, a junior manager from their branch dojo in Oak Ridge spoke with urgency. "There's been an incident," he said. "One of the assistant instructors, Mr. Keene, was caught berating and shoving a young student. Parents are furious. They're threatening to pull their kids. Some have already posted about it online." Sierra's grip tightened on the phone. A scandal like this could tarnish the Hale name beyond repair, especially with the Ray Walker video still in circulation. But beneath her business instincts, she felt something else, shame. Because this wasn't just about public image. This was about her dojo failing its most sacred duty, protecting its students. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Sierra said, sharply hanging up. Ray and Emma were at the park when Sierra arrived. Ava had been sitting on her usual bench, quietly watching Emma practice her forms, when her twin stormed up, eyes blazing with restrained fury. "Ava, we have a problem," Sierra said, her tone clipped. Then her eyes flicked to Ray. For a moment, her pride warred with her need. Finally, she exhaled each word, dragged from a place she rarely visited, humility. "Walker, I need your help." Ray raised a brow, not unkindly. "What happened?" Sierra hesitated. "One of our instructors. He hurt a student. Parents are furious. If I go in guns blazing, I'll make it worse. If I defend him, I'll look heartless. I don't know how to handle this without burning the whole dojo down." Ray studied her. For the first time, her usual steel armor looked cracked. She wasn't the untouchable CEO tonight. She was a leader drowning in consequences. He glanced at Emma, who was wiping sweat from her forehead, with the sleeve of her jai watching curiously, then back to Sierra. "All right," he said simply. "I'll come with you." The Oak Ridge dojo was tense when they arrived. Parents huddled together near the front desk, voices rising in anger. A few children clung to their mothers, red-eyed from tears. The accused instructor stood stiffly in the corner, muttering excuses about discipline and respect. When Sierra entered, whispers broke out. Phones lifted, recording, always recording. Her reputation was on the line. But before she could speak, Ray stepped forward. "Evening," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "I'm Ray Walker. I don't work here, but I've seen enough dojos to know when one has lost its way." The room quieted. His presence carried a weight the parents couldn't deny. Ray walked slowly across the mat and crouched before a small boy, no older than 7, who hid behind his mother. "Son," Ray said gently, "did he hurt you?" The boy nodded, eyes glistening. Ray didn't look at the instructor, not yet. He looked at the parents. A dojo is supposed to be the safest place your children step into. If they leave here afraid, then we've failed, not just as teachers, but as human beings. The words struck harder than any corporate apology could. Parents murmured, nodding their anger, cooling into something more focused expectation. Ray finally turned to the instructor, his tone sharp and firm, but never raised. Karate is not about breaking children down. It's about building them up. You don't deserve that belt if you think otherwise, the instructor sputtered. It was discipline. Ray stepped closer, his calm more intimidating than any shout. Discipline without compassion is just cruelty, and cruelty has no place on these mats. The silence that followed was heavy absolute. Sierra stood back, stunned. She had come here bracing for a fight, expecting Ray to shame her in front of everyone, or perhaps to walk away altogether. Instead, he had spoken words she should have spoken herself. One of the parents turned to Sierra. "What are you going to do about this?" Sierra swallowed hard. For once, she didn't have a polished statement prepared. She looked at Ray, then back at the parents. "We'll remove him immediately. And I promise you, from this day forward, every instructor at Hale Legacy will be retrained, not just in technique, but in the true meaning of karate. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't perfect. But it was honest. And it was enough." Parents slowly nodded, some even softening. The boy's mother squeezed his hand, whispering reassurance. The tension in the room began to ease. Later, as they stepped outside into the cool night air, Sierra finally let her guard down. She turned to Ray, her voice low. "You didn't just save the dojo, you saved me." Ray shook his head. "No, you saved yourself. You chose honesty. That's harder than any fight." Sierra's throat tightened. For years, she had believed that strength meant never bending, never breaking. But tonight, she saw something different. True strength meant admitting when you had been wrong and having the courage to change. Ava, who had watched the entire exchange, silently touched her sister's arm. "He's more than a legend, Sierra. He's what we should have been all along." Ray said nothing, only took Emma's hand, as she skipped happily beside him. But in his silence, the sisters found their answer. For the first time in their lives, Ava and Sierra Hale were not looking down at someone. They were looking up. Ava Hale had faced investors who sneered at her lawyers, who threatened lawsuits, and competitors who vowed to tear her down. Yet nothing unnerved her more than the blank page in front of her now. The letter sat half-written on her mahogany desk, her pen poised, but trembling. She had started over 3 times. Each attempt felt too polished, too corporate language that belonged in boardrooms, not in the quiet space between 2 people who had stood on opposite ends of humility. She exhaled slowly, forcing her hand to keep moving. "Ray, I know apologies don't change the past, but gratitude can shape the future. You didn't just defend yourself that night in the dojo, you defended the spirit of karate. You reminded me that strength isn't about dominance, but about dignity. For that, I owe you more than words can hold." She paused, chewing her lip. It felt like too much, and not enough at the same time. Her mind wandered to the park, to the evenings, when she sat on the bench watching Ray guide Emma through her forms. She had thought she came there to observe, to atone silently. But she had found herself drawn to the quiet cadence of their lives, Emma's laughter echoing through the dusk, Ray's patient voice correcting her stances, the small, unshakable bond between father and daughter. Ava had built empires, yet in that park she felt poor. Poor in the one wealth Ray had in abundance, love that asked for nothing, gave everything. She bent back to the page, her pen pressing harder now. "I am grateful, but I am also changed. Watching you with Emma, it has awakened something I didn't realize I had lost. Perhaps what I want to say is this: thank you, not just for sparing us in that dojo, but for showing me what it means to truly live by the code. I don't know what that means for us yet, but I had to tell you before the words drowned inside me." Her hand shook as she signed her name. She folded the letter carefully, sealing it in a plain envelope. There was nothing elegant about it, and that was the point. The next evening, Ava found herself outside Ray's modest home. The porch light glowed softly, and through the window, she saw the shadow of Emma twirling in her karate gi, giggling as her father pretended to stumble backward from one of her clumsy kicks. The sight pierced Ava's chest with a mixture of warmth and longing. She slipped the envelope through the slot in the door and turned to leave, her heart pounding like she had just stepped into a fight. Inside, Ray discovered the envelope after tucking Emma into bed. He read the words slowly, his brow furrowing not from discomfort, but from the strange weight of them. Ava's words were not like the hollow apologies he had grown used to. They were raw, unguarded. They revealed a heart struggling against pride, reaching for something more. He folded the letter back into its envelope and set it on the table. He didn't know what to feel. Gratitude, uncertainty, hope. He only knew that the woman who had once mocked him was no longer the same, and that unsettled him more than her arrogance ever had. The next morning, Emma found the letter while reaching for her crayons. She squinted at the handwriting, mouthing the words slowly. When Ray entered the room, she looked up with a mischievous grin. "Daddy?" she said, her voice sing-song. "Do you love the CEO?" Ray froze, mid-step heat creeping up his neck. "Emma, she wrote you a love letter?" Emma giggled, holding up the envelope like a prize. "It says she's grateful, but I think it means she wants to marry you, hey?" Groaned, plucking the envelope gently from her hands. "It's not a love letter, sweetheart. It's just an apology." Emma tilted her head, unconvinced. "Well, if it's not love, why are you blushing?" Her innocent laughter filled the room, and despite himself, Ray laughed too. For the first time in years, he felt the unfamiliar flutter of possibility, fragile but undeniable. Later that day, he stood before the mirror with scissors in hand. His hair had grown wild over the years, a silent rebellion against caring what the world thought. Slowly, carefully, he trimmed it. He shaved the edges of his beard, pressed an iron to his shirt, even polished the worn boots he'd carried through deserts and storms. When Emma came skipping into the room, she gasped. "Daddy, you look like a soldier again." Ray smiled faintly at his reflection. "No," he murmured. "I look like a man who's ready to stop hiding." That evening, Ava returned to the park. She sat on the same bench, expecting to see Ray in his usual worn clothes, guiding Emma with quiet patience. Instead, she blinked in surprise. Ray stepped onto the grass in a neatly pressed shirt. His hair trimmed his posture, still as steady as ever, but with a presence she hadn't seen before. Emma bounded happily beside him, tugging his hand toward the swings. Their eyes met for a brief moment across the fading light. Ava's breath caught in her chest. For the first time, she wasn't looking at a janitor or even a legend. She was looking at a man whole, humble, and quietly unshakable. And something in her heart whispered, "This is what I couldn't say in the letter." The dojo banners came down one by one. The glossy posters of Ava and Sierra Hale arms folded, and eyes fierce no longer matched the spirit within the walls. Students had stopped looking to them for perfection. They wanted something truer, something steadier, something, or rather, someone that reflected the soul of martial arts. 2 weeks after the Oak Ridge incident, a new banner was unveiled above the main entrance True Form Dojo. No longer about image, no longer about empire. It was about rediscovering the roots of karate discipline, humility, compassion. Ray stood just inside the doorway, mop in one hand, Emma's small fingers curled around the other. Students bowed as they passed him, not out of obligation, but out of respect. For weeks, rumors had swirled about whether he would accept a teaching role. And though Ray resisted titles and spotlight, Ava and Sierra had insisted True Form Dojo needed him, not as a custodian, but as a guide. That evening, the first class under the new name gathered. Dozens of students, old and new, lined the mats. Parents watched from the benches. Grace stood proudly among them, her eyes shining. Ava and Sierra, dressed in simple joys, bowed as equals, not as CEOs. Ray stepped forward, his voice steady. Tonight we begin again. Not to erase what was, but to build what should be. Karate is not about winning or losing. It's about finding balance within yourself and with others. The students listened with a reverence that no shouting could command. Emma tugged at his sleeve. She stood in her small white GI, her belt tied in a knot that was slightly crooked, but filled with pride. Ray looked down at her, and in that moment, the weight of the past seemed to lift. The steel ghost was gone. What remained was a father, a teacher, and a man finally at peace with both. As the class began, Ray moved with calm precision, demonstrating techniques, slowly emphasizing form over force. He corrected a young boy's stance, gently guiding his shoulders back. He showed a teenage girl how to focus her breath, not her fists. His every gesture carried patience, not ego. On the sidelines, Ava and Sierra exchanged a glance. For the first time in their lives, they felt proud, not of their achievements, but of the humility they were learning. During a break, Grace approached Ray. "You know," she said softly, "this dojo isn't just different because of the name. It's different because of you." Ray shook his head, smiling faintly. "It's different because people chose to change. I just reminded them why." Grace's eyes glistened. "Maybe. But sometimes, the world needs reminding." Later that night, after the mats were rolled and the lights dimmed, Ray remained behind with Emma. She stood on the empty floor, feet planted, hands, raised her small body, trembling with the effort of focus. "Daddy," she said, her voice full of determination, "spar with me." Ray chuckled softly. "Sparring isn't about fighting, sweetheart. It's about control." Emma's eyes gleamed with stubborn fire. "Then let me try. Please." He hesitated, then nodded. They bowed to each other, student to teacher. Emma stepped forward with a clumsy jab, her little feet slipping. Ray guided her fist gently aside, showing her balance. She tried again, more determined, her laughter bubbling between breaths. Finally, she paused, chest rising and falling. "Did I win?" Ray knelt before her, resting his hands on her small shoulders. His voice was tender, carrying the weight of every lesson he had ever lived. "You'll win, Emma, when you learn that sparring isn't about defeating someone. It's about protecting, about respect. When you can protect instead of harm, then you've truly learned." Emma's eyes shone with pride. She threw her arms around him. "Then I'll practice until I can protect like you do." Ray held her close, his throat tightening. In her words, he heard the promise of a future brighter than any medal, any accolade. A future where his daughter would carry the balance he had fought so hard to reclaim. Outside the dojo, Ava lingered beneath the soft glow of the street lamps. She had come not to intrude, but simply to witness. Through the window, she saw Ray kneeling with Emma, their silhouettes framed in golden light. For the first time in years, Ava felt something she couldn't define, a stirring of hope, of affection, of faith that healing was possible, even for the most broken hearts. She whispered into the night, though no one heard, "Thank you, Ray." Inside, Ray rose, carrying Emma's backpack over his shoulder as she skipped happily toward the door. He caught Ava's gaze through the glass, their eyes meeting for the briefest moment. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. The silence between them was no longer cold. It was possibility. As father and daughter stepped into the night, Emma swung her bear by its paw and asked, "Daddy, do you think I'll ever be as strong as you?" Ray smiled, ruffling her hair. "Stronger," he said simply. And as they walked home beneath the quiet stars, Ray Walker knew balance had finally returned, not just to the dojo, but to his life. And that brings our story to a close. But I would truly love to know, where are you watching from today? Share it with us in the comments below. Every greeting from you means more than you know. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the journeys ahead. Stories where kindness, love, and healing always find a way to shine. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for spending your precious time with us. May peace and warmth be with you and those you love.